We are basically now going into our new strategic plan 2021-2025, and economic inclusion of LGBTI people will feature heavily within our new strategic plan because of these learnings that we've had from Finance Inc.
We have lots of lessons, reflections, and model, and APCOM will be pursuing this moving forward strategically, looking at how do we engage non-traditional sectors.
Bringing the experiences from these 4 countries, and they can become technical support providers to other countries that are looking at engaging with the private sector in the region. So we hope that we'll be able to do more of this in more countries.
We have the information, we find the gap, and then we will know that what is the lack of the support. So we can go and support them, guideline them, and work together to help them.
We are starting some research onto legal barriers to SOGIE inclusion because we believe that is the right place to start, and that's also the evidence that APCOM have presented to us. But you know, it's going to go beyond that. We're going to look at like social factors, cultural factors. For the first time, SOGIE will be an essential part of that SOGIE review. So that's also a very exciting future direction. So I'm really excited that we're just about to get started.
Of course, in the future, we have planned to continue our project. Would like to include more private sector in Laos as well. Bigger company, government sector. The government might help us on influencing the private sector to get involved with our project in the future.
We continue raising awareness on SOGIE and diversity and inclusion on social media, on mass media, using video. We also plan to organize a panel discussion that's bringing relevant stakeholders like LGBTQI activist organizations, private sector, Chamber of Commerce, Asian Development Bank, and government agencies on how to be more LGBTQI inclusive.
Based on our existing experience, we would like to continue cooperation with the related parties.
For example, we want to make deep research that related to inclusion with the private sector. So in the practice of inclusion, they get more profit to their company.
We plan to use the research we produced as part of the evidence base for policy advocacy, particularly for the anti-discrimination bill.
The SOGIE orientation modules we developed, we shared them with our partner LGBTQI organizations, and we hope that more organizations will start to use these modules in engaging the private sector.
You know, any corporates can make it beautiful as much as they can. The thousands of good practices are available out there. However, it can only bring significant changes only when the private sector take meaningful participation with concrete indicators and measurement.
We want to make sure that they have very clear non-discrimination policies on paper and that they're putting those policies to work in practice. Being attentive to documentation of human resources, benefits and compensation.
For example, you can have supports for spouses or for partners on an equal basis, whether they be same-sex or non-same-sex.
And then some organizations would even take one step further to look beyond their organization, whether they can engage wider LGBT organizations as well as advocating for policy and social change at a societal level.
Look beyond the business itself to the supply chain and to the public at large. So look to your third parties, subcontracting, for example, from macro multinationals to micro, small-scale industries and so on.
To make sure that none of the people who contract with them to do programs are discriminating. To make sure that LGBTI people are included and can access the programs that they offer.
I think, well, first of all, they have to recognize the LGBTI people as totally equal to their other employees in their companies. That is, of course, the basis of what they have to do. But I think that beyond that, private companies have clients and they have, of course, their contact with the authorities. And I think on these two action streams, they could be quite active in terms of promoting an equal treatment of LGBTI people by their clients and certainly also by the authorities. And then I'm talking about labor laws, tax laws, health insurance. I think these are all sectors where the private sector would also plead for an equal treatment.
I think one way that LGBT organizations can engage the financial sector is to let them know that this is not only a good thing to do, but it is also something that is very beneficial for them to do. If an organization becomes more LGBT inclusive, then their staff are going to be more loyal, more productive. They're also going to open up new markets that were untapped in the past. This is not only a good thing to do, but it is something that makes great business sense as well.
In fact, there was one study by Global Banking System where the loss globally is like $75 million a year because your employees cannot be comfortable and be productive.
Research can be a very valuable tool when community organizations.
We need lots of data, we need lots of stories, and when people tell story, business keen to think it's just a small unit of samples. So we need to make it more concrete. For example, is it possible for us to conduct survey together, to do research together, to bring more evidence, Evidence tells story.
I will say that external pressure can also matter. In economics, we call external pressure competition. So community organizations can be those visible hands that are helping to catalyze and spread the word about LGBTI inclusion. Look at what these other people are doing, these other companies are doing. You're going to be left behind if you don't take the same kinds of inclusive actions.
In terms of strategies LGBTQI organizations should take to influence the inclusion in the finance and private sectors, and that is a committed and long-term engagement with specific institutions on these issues. These NGOs should be involved with private sector on an ongoing basis, not just in and out on specific issues, or maybe they only see them at a certain time of year during Pride. Really create those partnerships to help move this inclusion agenda through the private sector and be seen by the private sector as a trusted and reliable partner.
Doing the homework to know what the arguments are that will actually move organizations in the financial space.
Because business will always worry. They put their concern related to the operational risk, their reputation risk, and their legal risk. And it takes time. So be patient and keep working hard with them, because we have to understand that generally we speak different languages. They speak business language. We speak human rights language. We have to ensure that these can be merged and understand in the same level.
Well, obviously the LGBTQI organizations have a very important role to play. I mentioned already the IDAHOT kind of activities, the APCOM kind of activities, which of course is quite important. But apart from that, I think that they could talk with the private sector, and perhaps not that much officially in big conferences, but also more privately, more behind the scenes, to again have a dialogue with the private sector to show to them the positive side of having LGBTI people in the companies.
The big change for me within the APCOM Secretariat is that we now have a team that are working primarily on LGBTQI human rights, whereas before APCOM is much more known for our HIV work. That has been our legacy from when we started in 2007. So from the past 3 years, we really have much more of a footprint now on LGBTQI human rights work, helping us to then amplify the voices of the communities that are working in the region.
Finance Inc. gave APCOM the opportunity to explore partnerships. We have now those lessons, we have the reflections given our experience in implementing Finance Inc.
The changes that I see, obviously, we have more engagement with the community-based organizations, and we have contact with the private sectors and also with the government sectors. We have the opportunity to talk together and to develop more, like what we should do.
What changed at APCOM is, I think we now have the models internally for APCOM and for our country partner organization on how do we engage financial and development sector. APCOM is looking at this more strategically, more longer term, towards building more partnerships with those sectors which we have not engaged with before.
A good lesson learned. I think building a good relationship with the private sector is the most important. I believe that most of the private sector in Laos still not understand about SOGIE. We have to encourage them to support LGBT inclusion policy and also building more supportive environment for LGBT people in the workplace.
We have also learned that engaging private sector companies and building relationships with them require different ways of approaching and crafting our language in order to influence positive policy changes.
We have one big challenge when we contact multinational companies or big companies that are known as inclusive, but in the end they refuse to talk about their practice in Indonesia.
The challenge that may be expected is the argument that Asia is a very culturally conservative environment. But I argue that Asia is actually rapidly changing. Look at the example of Taiwan. Taiwan has become the first jurisdiction in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. Empirical evidence shows that there is increasing public support for LGBT rights in Hong Kong, for example, which I have conducted. So I would argue that the backlash and opposition, though it may seem vocal in the public, but it's actually only in the small minority. So Asia is a rapidly changing cultural landscape.
The private sector, they're set in their ways on certain things and often don't even understand what they don't know. And so the challenges are bringing knowledge, the challenges are bringing technical know-how, so how might you, ideas for how you might do this.
There are many challenges. I think having a data-based strategy is a challenge because of the quality and amount of data that we have available. And that is a place where an agency like the Asian Development Bank can be so influential in helping to create data, going out and conducting surveys, doing experiments to see how LGBTI people are treated. The other kind of challenge that's always there is the question about stigma and bias. Sometimes people have individual feelings that come from the cultures that we live in that say that LGBTI people are somehow different from non-LGBTI people, or they're somehow less worthy of inclusion than non-LGBTI people. This kind of challenge is a tough one. It's a tough one because it exists at many levels. It's not just the people, the individual people, but it's also the culture. So I think we have to think on several levels at the same time to show more examples of LGBTI people in the media that are not, kind of your stereotypical LGBTI people. That can be very important. Finding supportive leaders to be good role models of LGBTI inclusion, that can be extremely powerful as well.
I think that under the Finance Inclusion Project, we have found that something change happened in our organization, particularly for a new relationship between GS and private sector work structure.
For the longest time, we have been engaging private sector through having SOGIE workshops with them. But now we were able to expand it by being more proactive in trying to influence policy changes, positive policy changes in their companies.
And we build common perception about inclusion, especially inclusion in workplace.
Under this project, we could have an opportunity to find out some activity to move forward our project in the future.
Well, I think the lessons we've learned from the 4 countries can be replicated in different other countries. It takes time. In the Western world, it also took time.
For us then, going forward would be how do we then maximize the work that we've done the past 3 years and really ensure that it's not just the reports on the shelves, it's really about how do we then use the experiences, the reports that has come out, and use that for the advocacy to ensure that there will be some movement towards LGBTQI inclusion in the private sector in the years to come.
This project gave us the opportunity to pursue that longer-term strategy and vision. The voices of the LGBTQI communities should be front and center because we believe in nothing about us without us. We should be leaving no one behind.